Can't be any worse out there.
Ellie, come on. Go.
Can it?
How many known types of infected are there in the world of The Last of Us, and how does the infection progress? The Cordycep's fungal infection is one of the most unique apocalypse catalysts in modern pop culture, and has created a fascinating world that the survivors of the infection have to navigate. Throughout the course of both games and the HBO series, we see several different types of infected with different abilities, and today, my friends, let's talk about the infection and how it progresses through the years. In The Last of Us Part 2, the player is tasked with infiltrating the basement of an infected hospital, and here we can find several notes that detail the slow loss of sanity from infected patients. The notes were written either on or shortly following day 0, so these would be among the first victims of the infection before it spread worldwide. We can see that the infected's train of thought continuously gets interrupted, and we can see their thoughts become more and more primal as the infection spreads. Eventually, these patients will fully turn and lose all of their voluntary motor function, turning completely over to the grips of the Cordyceps. What's truly terrifying about this transformation, though, is the basis that it has in real life, and more specifically, what we know about the actual Cordyceps fungus. In the real world, the Cordyceps fungus infects ants, causing them to behave in much the same way as the infected in the world of The Last of Us. Several researchers assert, however, that the Cordyceps take control of muscle systems, but they do not kill the host. If brain activity is still present, then it would mean that the infected are still trapped inside their bodies with no control of their movement. They may have lost the ability to speak, move, and reason, but if real-world science tracks into the fictional world, then they are still very much alive. Once they lose control, however, they evolve into runners. On the surface, runners are physically very similar to regular people, but they are now completely mindless, driven by instinct and the Cordyceps. They are driven by this primal rage and a desire only to spread the Cordyceps to every other living being. These enemies are known for charging and attacking head-on, but are still susceptible to the same weaknesses as a regular person. They can be shot or beaten with relative ease, but where their true power lies is in their numbers. 1 or 2 runners can be taken out fairly easily, but a swarm of them is much more difficult to ward off, especially given the incredible limited supplies that survivors have at any given moment. Bullets, Molotov cocktails, and other tools are incredibly scarce and have to be carefully rationed at the earliest convenience. If the runner survives long enough though, then the infection will finally begin to break the skin, resulting in the grotesque veins and cysts growing all over their body. Since the Cordyceps target the brain in particular, most of these boils and cracks can be seen on the head, leading us to the next phase of infested, the stalker. A runner becomes a stalker when the infection begins to damage its eyesight. As the fungus grows through a stalker's head or face, it begins to have trouble seeing and has to resort to less conventional attacks. A stalker will hide and wait for its prey to be vulnerable before lunging out, getting 1 or 2 good hits in before retreating and hiding once again. Fights with stalkers often result in a game of cat and mouse, but what's interesting to note is that this stage of infected is not present in the first game, at least its initial release, and was added for the updated version. There are, however, several voice files where Ellie warns Joel about impending stalkers, but this seems to have been removed from the base game when it was released and then added later. The first time originally you encounter a stalker is in the Left Behind DLC, where Ellie has to navigate several of them at a time across her adventure in Colorado. They become more and more prevalent in the second game, and several packs of them can be found throughout Seattle. Eventually, however, the Cordyceps continue to grow until it completely blinds the subject, at which point, the stalker officially mutates into the most famous, in one of the final stages, a clicker. Clickers are among the most dangerous enemies in the entire series. A clicker's mutated fungal plating on the face often provides it with massive amounts of protection against conventional attacks. This sort of makeshift armor is often able to absorb a couple of gunshots before the brain is hit and damaged, making headshots far less effective against clickers than against any other type of infected. The trade-off, however, is that the clickers are now completely blind. Now they have to rely on echolocation in order to locate their victims, and if survivors can hide and move silently, then they can oftentimes get by clickers without ever alerting them. The key to taking out a clicker is to hold still when it's near, simply because it notices motion and will locate survivors who try to move while within earshot. Only after many years of infection, however, does an infected subject mutate into one of the next 2 stages, as they are exceptionally rare. As of now, we only see 3 types of infected that are older than the clicker. One is an outlier that we will touch on in just a minute, but the primary two examples are the bloater and the shambler. Of the two, bloaters are more common and are completely encased with fungal plating. Not only are they the most durable type of infected, but they also have pockets of spores that they can throw at survivors with the hope of infecting them from a distance. These growths in the original are often found on the shoulder and the other growing out of the bloater's abdomen. If the player can shoot both, however, then the bloater becomes severely weakened and can be killed much easier. The game will still allow the bloater to throw these spore pockets at you though, but destroying both severely damages a bloater and makes him easier to finally bring down. Although the bloater is technically blind, it's strong enough to rampage through its targets instead of hiding like a stalker. But what's interesting is that this stage of infection seems prone to mutation. While bloaters are the most common evolution from a clicker, there is another stage of infected known as the shambler. These types are rarer than bloaters, and the characters in the game even acknowledge how rare they really are. The first time the player sees a shambler is also Ellie's first time seeing a shambler herself, leading her to question it as well. Some artifacts around the area shed more light on what exactly happened and how the shambler formed, and one specifically notes that shamblers seem to be what happens when something gets halfway to the bloater stage and then mutates. Instead of just a few spore pockets, most of the shambler's upper torso is an ejection point for spores. A shambler's goal is to get as close to a survivor as possible before releasing a cloud of acidic debris that severely burns the skin. What's interesting to note here is that Ellie's immunity allows her to walk through spore-infested areas without getting sick or turning, but this still does not protect her from shambler spores, which cause immense searing pain from a shambler burn. And the final type of infected though is something we have only seen once. We don't know yet if there are more examples of this mysterious creature, or if this was the only one, and we are talking of course about the Rat King. While traversing the aforementioned hospital basement, we are introduced to Ground Zero for the entire city, the single oldest point of infection that Seattle has to offer. In this tomb, several infected seem to have mutated and fused together into one abomination. The Rat King is one of the most terrifying enemies in the Last of Us universe, so much so that we decided that it warranted its own video to cover, so be sure to check that video as well for a full analysis. In short, however, the Rat King is grotesque, nigh unkillable, and a barbaric machine of death. These several infected enemies have grown together in a combination that strikes fear into even the most hardened of survivors. The Rat King is extremely hard to kill and should not be trifled with, being the ultimate form of the infected that we currently are familiar with. But anyway, my friends, what do you think of the Last of Us Cordycep infection? Do you find the Cordycep infection to be among the most creative of apocalypse causes in all of fiction? And also, did we miss anything about the mutation from one stage to another? Thank you as always so much for visiting the channel today, and I hope you're having a great one.